we can get started. People will still be joining, but I think that it's time for us to get underway. So I want to first thank everyone who's chosen to join us this evening. And it's so special and it's so nice to see so many people with us once again. 2 words just for the technical arrangement.
Dos palabras sobre cuestiones técnicas.
The program this evening is going to be translated simultaneously, and it's available in English and in French and in Spanish. Those who weren't with us last time, just to remind you that at the bottom of your screen, you have an icon that says interpretation, and you can then choose which language you want to hear in. And then you'll choose whichever language you want to hear in. You have 2 options. You choose which language. So if you want to hear the original language or only the interpretation. And our recommendation is to turn off the original language during lectures and to turn on original language when there's questions and answers, so that you hear everything that is going on. Those settings anytime during the program. So if you want to practice another language, that's also a possibility. So that's just the technical thing. And one other technical question is if there's someone who is able to translate from Spanish into French, please let us know. Put in the chat that you're able to do that, and then we'll put you in that position. But we're missing a Spanish to French translator. Otherwise, we're going to get going. So this is the second meeting in our series that we're doing connected with the Masorti Movement. Last time, 2 weeks ago, we talked about the ideology of the Masorti Movement. We tried to have a discussion about what is Masorti Judaism. I said then that one of the features of the Masorti Movement is that almost anyone you speak to and you say, what is Masorti Judaism? No one knows what it is. Tonight, we're not talking about ideology. Tonight, we're talking about the movement as a movement. The movement is a very large movement. There's over 1 million members in the Masorti/conservative movement around the world. And another feature of the world conservative Masorti movement is that very few of the members know how the movement works. So people have perhaps heard about different institutions. If you mention the Masorti movement in Israel, if you mention Masorti Olami, if you mention Marom, maybe they've heard names like that. But most of the institutions that are in the movement, people maybe have heard the name, but they don't know what they are, and they don't know what they do. And the movement, as a large movement with thousands of communities and in many different countries, has lots of institutions. And what we want to do this evening is to introduce some of those institutions so that you know a little bit more. We're not going to be able to introduce everything, and we're not going to be able to tell you everything about those institutions, but we want our members to be more familiar with our movement. And the main things that people should know, we want to introduce this evening. I'm already saying that there are some key institutions that we're not talking about this evening. So we're not going to talk about Marom, which is our student group, and we're not going to talk about Noam, which is our youth movement, and we're not going to talk about the Masorti movement in Israel, which is an important part of the Masorti movement. And the reason that we're not mentioning them is that those are perhaps the 3 most important ones for us, and they're each going to get their own session. So we will spend a lot of time talking about what Marom is, a lot of time what Noam is, a lot of time on the movement in Israel, but those are so important. They're not for a 5-minute introduction this evening. They're for much more detail. This evening, we want just a brief introduction to the kind of broader institutions in the movement that we just want everyone to hear and to know their names. So that's kind of a general introduction to the subject. We have 5 speakers with us this evening. Each one is going to give a short presentation about one of the institutions in the movement. They'll present, they'll explain what they do. Hopefully it will be interesting. If you have questions, we're asking everyone to put questions in the chat rather than just come out with the question. We can't have everyone speaking at the same time, but put the questions in the chat, and then we will stop at the appropriate times and we'll make space for people's questions also. So that's the rules for the game this evening. And we're going to get going. And the first person I want to invite to speak this evening is Rabbi Mauricio Balter. Rabbi Balter is the executive director of Masorti Olami, the World Masorti Movement. Be nice to him. He's my boss, so you have to be nice to him. And he's going to speak to us this evening, and he'll be speaking in his language, Spanish. So the English people will be hearing translations, French will be hearing translations, and the Spanish will get to hear it in the original language. Just before we get into his talk, if there's someone who is able to translate from French into Spanish, please let me know. And from Spanish into French, please let me know. And if not, then it will go to...
Alexander has volunteered to attempt to translate from Spanish into French.
Okay. Have you added him? No. So one moment. Is Alexander?
I just unmuted.
Yeah.
Alexander Mertz?
Yeah, I'm here.
Okay. So you are now a translator from Spanish into French.
But we don't have to be somebody else. I'm not the one that can speak French or Spanish.
No. Okay. Let's get into it anyway. Over to you, Mauricio. Tell us about what is Masorti Olami.
Okay, as Erev Tov.
Hello, good evening.
Eso no es en español, pero Erev Tov es buenas tardes
Erev Tov
en hebreo.
in
Aquí
Hebrew.
en Israel estamos
Good
a
evening.
las 9 de la noche
It's
y
9 o'clock in
voy a
Israel,
compartir con ustedes
and I will share with
algunas
some information.
información. Un segundito que abrimos nuestro...
He will open the presentation.
Okay. ¿Pueden ver la pantalla?
Can you see the screen?
¿Se ve la
The
pantalla?
presentation, do you see them?
Can you see the screen?
Sí,
Muy bien.
Mauricio.
Bueno, Masorti Olami es
Masorti
la
Olami
organización que reúne
Organization
a todas las comunidades
that
Masorti
joins the
alrededor
all
del mundo,
Masorti communities
especialmente
around the
afuera de
world,
Israel
especially outside
y de
of
Estados
Israel
Unidos,
and
por
United
ahora. Y
for
después
now.
les explico por qué digo por ahora.
Later I will
Vamos a
explain this.
empezar por mirar un poquito el
Let's
mapa.
begin
Masorti Olami
looking at the
es el
map.
heredero
Masorti
de una
Olami
organización que se llamaba
is
World
the heir
Council of
of an
Synagogues
organization called
y
World Council
tiene su
Organization,
oficina, está pasando muy rápido, tiene su oficina
and its
en
office
Jerusalén.
it's in Jerusalem.
El mapa que yo fui preparando un mapa con distintas
prepared a map with
diapositivas para ver en
slides
distintos lugares del mundo.
to see
Bueno,
the different places in the world.
למטה תבחור את השפה שלך לספרדית.
אוקיי, רגע, אני צריך לצאת.
Sorry, we're just changing, because he's in the English track. That's why it was a bit hard to hear.
Just, okay.
Masorti es la
As he said,
que tiene
organization joining all the communities around the world. Most of our communities outside of United States is in Latin America, as you can see. Latin America has 81 communities, 5 Mercas chapters, 18 Noam chapters, 7 Maron chapters, and 1 rabbinic seminar in Buenos Aires. In Latin America, we have Masorti Amlat and an annual conference called Shituf that next week will take place online. Most of the communities are in Argentina, more than 40 communities in Argentina, and some of them pretty big. In Europe, our region, in Europe we have 40 communities, 8 Mercas chapters, 5 Noam chapters, and 6 Maron chapters, and 1 rabbinical school in Berlin. Sandra will talk about it later. Masorti Europe, of course, has its board meetings and other kind of meetings. In the ex-Soviet Union, we have 6 communities, 2 Mercas chapters, and 2 Noam chapters. One of them is Ukraine. Rabbi Stamov is here, and he has an incredible work.
Perdón, tenemos 10
We
comunidades.
have 10 communities, 2 Noam chapters, and 1 Maron chapter. In Africa, we are developing now. We have the development of the Masorti Judaism in Africa. In Australia, we have 7 communities. In Australia, in Tokyo, is a 65 years old community. We have 1 Mercas chapter and 1 Noam chapter. This is the instrument of the rabbi in Australia. And we include here also North America, where most of our communities are, with 600 communities, and Israel with 82 communities.
También tenemos todos los capítulos de Noam Israel, de Noam Olamí alrededor del mundo. Y es importante entender que la tarea más grande que tenemos, ahí tienen todo el mapa.
There you can see the whole map. It's sorry that everything goes very quickly. There we can see our worldwide map, how the movement is developed around the world. And we have to understand that some countries include several communities. There is a growth of the movement outside of the United States. We have 5 rabbinical seminars. The school where he studied in Latin America, in Israel, the Schechter Institute, in Europe, the Frankel Institute, and in the United States, the JTA seminar. The rabbinic seminar explain the development of our professional corps. We have a program with Marom. When students arrive to Israel, they work with that, together with Michal. They send student rabbis to different communities in Europe to make them know our movement. The stronger point of Masorti Olamí is to create the network, the connection, to develop tools to help us as a movement and to connect us as a movement. I think one of the things we have to develop even more is the connection. It's the network. Masorti is a worldwide movement. Demography speaks about high numbers in our communities. According to Jewish demographies, Masorti movement is the second movement behind the reform. And our idea of development is to develop communities where there are Jews that haven't found yet their house, their home. We don't want to compete with any other movement. We don't want to convert anyone, but we want, if someone didn't find his home at Judaism, can find a place to live its Judaism and develop their Jewish identity and transmit the tradition to their children in our communities. For that, we develop many programs. Of course, many things had to stop due to the corona crisis, but we have different conferences, a lot of work with young people. We have a session about Marom and Noam because from our perspective, we have to invest in the young people. That's one of the main things we have to do as a movement. We have to develop the volunteer work, support the communities, develop the students and youth movement. We try to work together with them, Marom and Noam, the youth movement. And that way we try to develop the Masorti movement in the different places in the world. Regarding young people, the network is working much better than for the grown-ups. The young are exchanging in different countries in Europe and Latin America, and their encounters, international meetings, are making their network stronger and bigger. This should be our next objective after the corona, to strengthen one of our projects that we wanted to work with our president. We will talk later. We had the idea of having the first international convention for the movement together with United Synagogues and other organizations to develop this meeting. We wanted to do it in December. It will be postponed, but it will be the first convention with all the organizations, United Synagogue, Masorti in Israel, and Masorti in the world. And also we are working, that's what I say, that Masorti Olami is working outside of United States and Israel. We are trying to work together with the 3 chapters. You saw part of that in the international prayer we had last month, and there are other activities that we are trying to do because our idea is to globalize the movement and allow one network that will include the 3 parts, Israel, United States, and the rest of the world. I had only 5 minutes, so I will stop now. If there are any questions, you have to write them on the chat.
So thank you very much, Rabbi Mauricio. If anyone has any questions, please put them in the chat. We apologize, there was a problem with the French translation, but that's been resolved for the rest of the evening. So I apologize for the people who are listening in French. I want to go on, and I want to invite Rabbi Philip Scheim, the president of Masorti Movement and the past president of the Rabbinical Assembly, to explain to us what is the Rabbinical Assembly, and particularly what is the CJLS, the Law Committee of the Rabbinical Assembly. So I'm passing over to Rabbi Scheim now, please.
Thank you, Rabbi Wiener, and Shalom L'Kulchem. And it is 2:20 p.m. in Toronto, and in Atlanta, where Margot is. We are the early birds amongst you. So it's not evening for us yet, but it is a pleasure to spend your evening with our afternoon. So a little bit about the Rabbinical Assembly. You're all familiar with the phrase Ad Mea Ve'esrim, in Yiddish bis 120, a wish that you live to 120. So the challenge will be
jusqu'à 120 ans.
the 120th
Et le
anniversary
défi,
of the Rabbinical Assembly. So to say Ad Mea Ve'esrim would be the wrong thing to say, because that would mean that we don't have much longer to go. So we pray for the next 120 years. So let me just give a brief background about the RA, the Rabbinical Assembly, and then about the CJLS, the Committee on Jewish Law and Standards. Rabbinical Assembly, again, founded in 1901, and it was originally not called the Rabbinical Assembly. It was the Alumni Association of the Jewish Theological Seminary of America in New York. And it becomes known as the Rabbinical Assembly about 20 years later. And the first thing that it does, we'll talk about it later, is establish a law committee. But the RA initially was a totally American organization, and it took until the 1970s for the America to be dropped. It was always the Rabbinical Assembly of America until about the 1970s, and then it just became the Rabbinical Assembly, recognizing that it is a global body. To this day, there are approximately 1,600 members of the RA, about 1,100 in the US, still the major base of the organization, but about 500 outside of the United States, and about 200 plus in Israel and throughout the rest of the Jewish world. The Rabbinical Assembly, again, functions primarily now. It is no longer the Alumni Association of JTS, because, as you've heard, we have 5 rabbinical seminaries now, but it is a gathering point for conservative Masorti rabbis worldwide. And work is still developing on finding a way to make it less of an American organization and more of an international body. We haven't gotten totally there yet. I was the very first president of the Rabbinical Assembly not to be a citizen of the US. Even though we had an Israeli president, but he was also an American. I'm the only RA president, or now past president, who was ineligible to vote in US elections. That does not keep me awake at night, considering what goes on in US elections these days. But so that is a brief glimpse of the RA. Again, it is more than a labor union, but it is an opportunity for us to work together, to share resources, to publish Sidurim and Machzorim and Chumashim and other documents and texts that are of substantial importance to the Masorti world. And again, the RA has a substantial presence in Israel, in South America, in Europe, and in Canada, Mexico, and many other parts of the Jewish universe. It'll be of interest to note that it was in 2001 that the very first European gathering of Rabbinical Assembly members took place in Paris in 2001. And since France is very well recognized, represented today, you should be proud of that fact. And now, of course, Europe gathers in various communities throughout the continent. So let's look at the CJLS, which I guess is a bit more interesting. And the RA began what was called the Law Committee in 1927, and it would eventually become known in 1948 as the Committee on Jewish Law and Standards. This is a body that meets pretty regularly. There used to be 3 or 4 physical meetings in New York, and now a lot of those meetings are virtual, of course, not only because of COVID, but just because of cost in general. Today, the RA has, the CJLS has 24 voting members. Voting members are all rabbis. There are United Synagogue representatives on the committee, but who are not voting members. Every year there are 6 rabbis appointed, and so there's a a gradual shifting of the membership, but some people have been on for many years and others just serve a 5-year term. I did my 5-year term about 15 years ago. It is a very passionate group of rabbis, most of whom are true masters of halakha, dealing with a wide range of issues from matters of ritual, public policy, and all of the kinds of questions that come up in a religious setting, and also how we incorporate modern contemporary life into Jewish law, which often has led to some of the most controversial decisions of the RA, starting in 1956 with the permission to drive to synagogue on Shabbat, which remains to this day controversial, although not as controversial as it was at the time, and several decisions in the 50s, beginning in the 50s, in terms of women's participation in ritual. It was in 1955 that the CJLS granted approval for women to be called to the Torah, to have aliyot. And by the way the law committee is structured, there can be contradictory positions. And so there was a position paper written in 1955 allowing women to have aliyot, and at the same time, Rabbi David Feldman writing a position paper that women were forbidden to have aliyot, and both remain valid positions. It took a long time for that to really enter congregational life. In the 60s, there were still very few congregations where women were called to the Torah. The numbers began to grow in the 1970s, and certainly by the 1980s in the US, most conservative congregations called women to the Torah. Very few Canadian congregations. I suspect very few in Europe and in Israel. And even to this day, there are congregations in my local community, not many, where women are not called to the Torah. So even today, so many decades later, it is not universally accepted, but the vast majority of Masorti conservative congregations today do call women to the aliyot. In 1973, the CJLS permitted women to be included in the minyan. And again, that has the same evolution, where it took a long time for that to be integrated into a majority of congregations, but today clearly it is the overwhelming majority, not 100%, but a large percentage. A couple of other, one other controversial decision was a time when I was on the CJLS. That's not why it came up then. I had nothing, I was on the committee, but I take no responsibility. The tshuva that dealt with homosexuality, human dignity, and halakha, and that was one of our most famous tshuvot, that dealing with the integration of gays and lesbians into Jewish communal life and ritual life. And the position, this tshuva was approved by a vote of 13 to 12. Even though normally 6 votes allows a position to become authentic Masorti halacha, it doesn't require a majority. This was considered a special case and would require a supermajority, which it achieved by 1 vote. There was another paper on the other side of the issue, which was very restrictive and not permitting the acceptance of homosexuality in any form, which received the required 6 votes. And interestingly, one of our members voted for both tshuvot, which we still to this day don't understand. But that was one of the groundbreaking tshuvot. I would just say a little bit of interesting sidelight to that issue. It was one of the only times where our committee, we were meeting then at the Park Avenue Synagogue, because it was felt there'd be too much attention drawn to us by the media if we were at JTS. We were meeting at Park Avenue Synagogue. We come out of Park Avenue Synagogue after the session, and there was a whole lineup of media, of TV cameras and reporters waiting to interview us as to what happened at this very, very groundbreaking decision. It was controversial at the time. I think at this point, totally not controversial whatsoever. And just to conclude, last week, a tshuva was issued, authored by Rabbi Joshua Heller, on streaming services on Shabbat and Yom Tov, very relevant to what we're experiencing now and the recognition that virtually every Masorti community will have to have some kind of online presence for the coming Yamim Noraim, and how we deal with now with Tefillot, with Shabbat, etc. Finally, just to tell you that if you want to access responsa of the CJLS, it's accessible on the Rabbinical Assembly website. It's rabbinicalassembly.org. Go to the main page, look under Jewish law, and the first item is Committee on Jewish Law and Standards, and there are dozens upon dozens of tshuva that you can download, and they're accessible unfortunately mostly only in English, and that's something that hopefully in time will be rectified and available in multiple languages as well.
Okay, so Rabbi Phil, thank you very much. I'm sure that there's lots of questions coming up with that, but I want to move on and we'll deal with the questions a little bit later in the evening. And I want to introduce Rabbi Joel Levy, who heads the Conservative Yeshiva, an institution in Jerusalem that many of us have had the opportunity to go to spend time there, to study Torah. And it's one of the big resources that's available for the Masorti Movement and for Masorti Europe. Many of our young people, but also older people, have the opportunity to study there. And I want to ask Rabbi Joel to tell us what the Conservative Yeshiva is and what can it do for us as a resource for Masorti Europe. So over to you, Rabbi Joel.
Hello, it's lovely to see so many people, especially people who've studied at the Yeshiva in the past, from France and from other countries across Europe. My name is Joel Levy, and I'm one of the heads, one of the Roshei Yeshiva of the Conservative.
Soy uno de los jefes de la yeshiva.
Un des responsables des Rosh Yeshiva.
It's the mid-90s. It's been around for about 25 years. It's an institution modeled on a traditional yeshiva in the Orthodox world, in that it's a full-time study program for people who want to take their Jewish studies onto the next level. The students who come to the yeshiva, either for the summer program or for a full year program, are going to be involved in a program which starts early in the morning with prayers in the morning, runs through the whole day. Students learning a classical curriculum with a lot of Mishnah and Talmud and Bible, philosophy, Kabbalah, theology, and the studies carry on until the evening. And so it's an intensive study program, but it's an institution that was specifically designed not to be for rabbis or rabbinical students. So many of the institutions of the Masorti movement are designed to create rabbis, and this is a program which right from the outset said that its purpose was to work with normal members of Kehilot. That means you. Our students are from very young to relatively old. The year program tends to be a little bit younger, but the summer program certainly is a little older. But everyone who's coming to the yeshiva, everyone who comes to the yeshiva from across the world, is coming largely not because they want to be professional Jews or rabbis, but because they want to deepen their relationship with Judaism, deepen their relationship with Jewish texts. And people come for a couple of different reasons. One is that they want to learn to read. And that sounds obvious, but for those of us who grew up, were keen members of synagogues as we were growing up, even the keenest kid on the block, even the keenest kid might find themselves, having passed through years and years of Jewish practice and education, not being able to break open the basic books of Judaism and read them for themselves. We find ourselves very dependent on translations and very dependent on other people's interpretation of the text. And to develop a relationship with the text, it's totally different if you can access that tradition in Hebrew for yourself. So I think everyone who comes to the yeshiva wants to be able to gain access to the tradition. That means being able to read Mishnah and Talmud and Bible for themselves. And we take people on a journey during the course of a year where the average student who comes in with an average Jewish education will be able to come out at the end of a year at the yeshiva being able to read the Bible for themselves and the Mishnah for themselves, maybe even Talmud a little. And that's a life-changing experience to be able to access the tradition for yourself. And the second reason why people come is to deepen their relationship with Judaism, to understand Judaism for themselves. And that means to develop an adult relationship, a grown-up relationship with Jewish theology and Jewish practice. For many of us, our Jewish education ended when we were 13 or 14 or 15, if we were lucky. And the ideas that we have about Judaism are ideas that were formed in childhood. And those ideas are not necessarily the right ideas as a grown-up. What does it mean to have a grown-up relationship with Jewish law, with halakha? What does it mean to have a grown-up relationship with God? What does it mean to develop a deep relationship with prayer as an adult so that you want to do it, so that you're drawn to it and understand it and have found a relationship with it? So those are two reasons for people who find their way to the yeshiva. In recent years, we've started allowing rabbis to come and study at the yeshiva. But we always, the opening speech that I always give to the rabbis when they knock on the door and say they're going to come to the CY, is that for the duration of their time when they're at the yeshiva, they have to forget that they're rabbinical students or rabbis. That we really want people who are there to be studying the Torah for its own sake. And sometimes rabbis also forget that the Torah is something to study, not because you're gaining advancement professionally or to pass exams, but because you love the Torah and because you want to deepen your relationship with Jewish learning. And so all the rabbis who come are encouraged to forget that they're rabbinical students for the duration of their time at the CY. So just a few other things, and then I'll finish within the 5-6 minutes that Chaim has given us. First thing is that structurally, where does the CY fit in the Masorti movement? The CY is part of the Fuchsberg Center, which is one of the departments of the USCJ, the United Synagogue of Conservative Judaism, which is the synagogue body of conservative Judaism in North America, which has its own department in Israel. And there's been a very strong, long-standing relationship between American conservative Judaism and the Fuchsberg Center. And we're very grateful for the support that's been given over decades to the yeshiva running out of the campus of the Fuchsberg Center. And the second thing is, just to answer Chaim's question, what's the yeshiva for someone who's a conservative Jew, a Masorti Jew living in Europe? It's for a couple of different things. Firstly, it's to take young people on a journey. And if there are people in your communities who are keen and interested, who you think would benefit from immersing themselves in Jewish learning in a fully egalitarian, totally intellectually open space, which is part of our movement, then we certainly want to meet those young people. We almost never turn people away for financial reasons. And we want to make it possible for anyone who wants to take Jewish learning up to the next level to do so. So that's one thing. And the second thing is, it's for you. And I will often say to synagogue groups that I meet that often those of us who've been involved in synagogue life for many years have always had a fantasy. What would it feel like to actually give myself the time to learn to read Jewish sources for ourselves? What would happen if I did that? What would happen if I gave myself the gift of some Jewish learning? We've had students in their 50s, 60s, 70s who've taken the time and committed themselves to doing some learning, and it can be a life-changing experience. And to give yourself the gift of Jewish learning, to say, I'm worth it, and I've reached a stage in my life where I've had enough of of opening Jewish texts and having somebody else translate them. I want to be able to do that for myself, and to say that I'm going to take on board that learning for myself and then move on with your own Jewish. It means that your relationship with Judaism and with God is forever changed. It's forever changed. You have a relationship which is first-hand and integral, as opposed to feeling like there's a barrier between you and the tradition. And I would welcome anybody for whom that sounds like an attractive prospect to knock on the door and to make a connection to us, and we'll try and find a way that we can help you in your Jewish journey wherever you want to go in your path. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Rabbi Joel. I already want to sign up and go for the summer. By the way, if you do want to sign up and go for the summer, this summer all of the courses are online. And it's an opportunity, if you couldn't take yourself to Jerusalem, to actually think about spending 3 weeks with the conservative yeshiva and it's something that I would recommend to everyone. In any case, I want to move on, and now we're going to talk about rabbinical schools. And as Rabbi Mauricio said, there are 5 rabbinical schools, but I've chosen 2. I want to first hear about JTS, which is the largest and the oldest and probably the most influential in the world Masorti movement. And then we want to hear about the Frankel College, because that's the European school, and that's very relevant for us as European communities. So I'm asking Rabbi Zagoria Moffat, who's one of the rabbis in our movement here in the United Kingdom. He's at the St. Albans Masorti community, and he's a graduate of JTS. And I've asked him to tell us a little bit about what JTS is, what's special about that institution, and why does it have such an important role in the world conservative / Masorti movement. So Rabbi Adam, over to you.
Thank you, Rabbi Chaim. I'm not necessarily the best.
We can't hear you, Adam.
Sorry.
Check you're in the right channel, in the English channel.
Is that better? Yeah, you can hear me now.
Yes, it is.
Thank you.
Okay, fabulous. I was going to say, I'm not sure I'm the best person to be a spokesperson for JTS in some ways, but it's worth understanding about JTS to understand Masorti Judaism, because it is in many ways the kind of gravitational center of a lot of what the Masorti movement does worldwide. Part of that is because of what's already been discussed by Rabbi Scheim in particular, that the CJLS, the Committee on Jewish Law and Standards, and the Rabbinical Assembly, and actually the United Synagogue of Conservative Judaism, all of these acronyms, they're all based from JTS, as are most other, at least American, Masorti institutions. So JTS is the Jewish Theological Seminary. Technically, it's the Jewish Theological Seminary of America, but everyone leaves off the A, which I think we'll appreciate here in not America. And the seminary actually has had multiple reincarnations throughout its life. It was begun originally by an interesting fusion of 2 Sephardi rabbis who had moved to New York City in the late 19th century, who were both from Italian and Spanish Portuguese backgrounds, in partnership with 2 Ashkenazi graduates who had themselves gotten smicha from the original Jewish Theological Seminary in Breslau, which was Rabbi Frankel's school, which we'll hear more about in a bit. So it started as an opportunity to create a center of learning for what these rabbis termed enlightened orthodoxy. And they instituted it primarily as a distinctly American institution. At the time, most rabbis in America had old world learning, and there weren't really yeshivot in the traditional sense in America. And JTS was one of the first major ones constructed to create an opportunity for people to learn and to train to be rabbis, to get smicha in America in an American way. It was shaped very much by its second chancellor, which is someone quite famous to many of us, who's Solomon Schechter. And when Solomon Schechter took over the seminary, it was in financial struggle, and he really largely kind of revived it by making it a really big center of Jewish life in America, by bringing a lot of scholarship to the seminary, and by articulating a vision of what conservative / Masorti Judaism could be. Schechter was obviously kind of someone who went between England and America quite a bit, and he shaped the seminary by the time he left in 1915 into quite a distinctly American institution that was very informed by American Jewish views. Since then, the seminary has continued to grow and to grow and to grow. It's remained more or less in the same place, which is the Upper West Side of New York City, just on the border with Harlem. And if you haven't visited the seminary, it's quite an imposing building as well. The large frontal part of it is a very tall tower that feels a little bit intimidating when you go up to it. It is not only a rabbinical seminary, but that's its primary understanding, is that people train to be rabbis there. They also train Jewish educators. There's a school of education. and they also train cantors. There's a cantorial school. And in addition, there's also a full academic program, both undergraduate in partnership with Columbia University and graduate up to the PhD level. So you have all sorts of different people in the seminary, all learning different things related to Judaism and Jewish life, some studying to be clergy, some studying just for academic purposes. And the result is it tends to be a very academically and scientifically minded Jewish institution. So although it is in some ways a yeshiva, it's structured far more as a university. And that was part of the Americanization of the yeshiva structure. And it's now kind of gone through more incarnations of its life cycle. And these days, JTS is still the leading seminary in many ways for Masorti Judaism, simply by numbers largely, but it isn't the only one. And it's had to share that responsibility with many others. As we heard, there's 5 seminaries now. But because the offices of so many Masorti institutions, many of which we're talking about, are based at JTS, inevitably it still retains its position of privilege amongst the rabbinical schools of our movement and amongst different institutional structures. JTS has had a reputation among the schools up until fairly recently as being the most conservative or the most traditional, certainly within the American context. That's changed a little bit in the last 10 years, I'd say. And now it's more akin to the other schools as well in our movement. But its leadership still, it remains very closely connected to the institutions that are more broad. So many of the deans of JTS are also, for instance, rabbis who sit on the CJLS, and also people who are very active in the RA. And quite a few of our rabbis around the world, including in the UK, have trained at JTS because there wasn't a rabbinical training seminary near them. So it in many ways is the default if you're looking to train as a Masorti rabbi and are able to move to New York for the 5 or 6 years that it usually takes. I'm happy to answer any questions about the seminary and about its culture and history as well. I have a lot of love for it. I just don't want to take up more time than we have necessarily. And I want to hear as well from Sandra, who's going to share a little bit about Zachariah Frankel.
Okay, thank you very much, Rabbi Adam. I think we're going to take the questions. If you have a question, put it in the chat, but we're going to take the questions towards the end of the evening. And I'm very keen that we have time to hear about the Zacharias Frankel College, and that is the newest of the seminaries and the one which is based here in Europe. But I don't want to tell you anymore because I've asked Sandra to do it, and I'm sure that she's very capable.
Yes, hi everybody. I'm equally
we can't
honored.
hear you. You have to change your. You have to change. Make sure you're in the English channel.
Okay. All right.
Okay.
Is this better?
Yes.
All right. Wonderful. Wonderful. Hi everybody. I'm equally honored and delighted to be able to speak tonight and to introduce you to the Zacharias Frankel College. And 2 weeks ago, when we were speaking about prolific thinkers or decisive figures for the Masorti movement, we already mentioned the name of Zacharias Frankel, the name giver of our college. And he was the founding director of the JTS, the Jewish Theological Seminary, in Breslau in 1854, actually the first modern rabbinical seminary. And I just came across this information, a really interesting fact, when the Breslau Seminary opened in 1851, in August, they couldn't celebrate because there was a cholera epidemic going on. So nothing new under the sun. The Frankel College also has actually a big celebration planned, our second ordination for October 25th this year, but we still don't know if it's going to happen as a big celebration or if we have to reschedule and do something else. But we are a very young institution, founded in 2013, and the first students enrolled in the academic year of 2015-16. And what's unique about the Frankel College is that it's both. It's a university and a community. So that means that actually for the very first time, Jewish theology could be studied at the university in a thoroughly academic and scholarly environment. And it was followed by a recommendation of the Council for the Science and Humanities to establish Jewish theology at the university and to put it on par with Christian theology and with Islam studies, Center of Islam. And that was really, really an important step towards pluralization of theology in the context of a university. And that also means that it's actually financed because it's run by the state. And we receive, just like any other denomination, we receive financial support from the government. So being placed at the university, but on the other hand, we also partner with the Ziegler School of Rabbinic Studies. And we just heard from Rabbi Adam that JTS is the default, so to speak, but Ziegler has by now also a 30-year tradition and experience of training rabbis. And it's our, if you want, religious supervisor. And our students, they actually receive 3 degrees. They get a BA and an MA in Jewish theology, and they get a smicha, the teuda, from Ziegler. And that also means that with the smicha, that they become a member of the rabbinical assembly that you heard about from Rabbi Philip Scheim tonight. So how exactly does it work? It's a 5-year program if everything goes streamlined. Like I said, it's divided into an BA and an MA, and it was fun for me to hear, Rabbi Joel Levy, that you said that the conservative yeshiva actually is not for rabbis or not for rabbinical students, or they should forget that they are rabbis or rabbinical students, because the conservative yeshiva is a big and important part for our students. They do go usually between the BA and the MA for 1 year to study at your wonderful institution and to study text, just like you explained. I think that's one of our distinguishing features, that it's based and it focuses on thorough text study. This is one thing, but on the other hand, like I explained, it's the setting is at the university, and we do meet the text in a scholarly and in an academic setting. But of course, there are also other other aspects of the professional training, and it includes pastoral care as well as synagogue skills and the knowledge of the makeup of the structure of Jewish communities, first and foremost in Germany, but then also in Europe and beyond. And our students do internships as well. So there is a blend between the academic and the very practical training. There are also multiple career paths afterwards. It's not just the classical pulpit congregational rabbi, and especially in times as such, I'm convinced we got to think anew what it means to be a rabbi, what it means to train rabbis, to prepare them and to answer the needs of the communities. And so we also have classes in entrepreneurship, and just to tackle the whole question of rabbinic education from an entrepreneurial aspect or perspective. So, and if you ask, so who are those Frankel students? Who is a classical, an ideal candidate for the Zacharias Frankel College? Then I always say those students, those candidates, they got to have both. They got to have Sechel and Menschlichkeit. So they got to be on an academic level, they got to operate on a high academic level. They got to know many languages, among them German. After all, that's Zacharias Frankel's language. They also got to master Hebrew and to be able to meet the text, as Joel described. And many of our classes are being taught in English. So those are the 3 main languages. And they got, like I said, they got to operate on a high academic level, but on the other hand, if they are not true mensch, then it won't work, because being a rabbi has all to do with relationships, and that's what we hope to create, a community within the university, and to prepare them the best possible way for the challenges that the Jewish communities and that the Masorti world faces. So yeah, I invite you all to participate in one way or another for the ordination. It's going to be online or it's going to be in person. We'll see. But I'm very much looking forward for our two candidates to be ordained this fall. Thank you. And I'm happy to take questions.
Thank you very much. And yes, we've had a chance to hear about 5 different institutions. And I've been following as we've gone along, and several questions have come up in the chat. And I'm going to ask, we'll go on to the questions now, or we'll have time for some of the questions. And I'm going to ask Tehila to choose the questions and then unmute the people and say whose question you're taking, and then ask people to ask their own question.
Okay, sure. So we got a question from, I believe, Shirley Fenster, if you're still here.
Yes, yes, I'm here.
Great. So you had a question before, I think, for Rabbi Scheim.
Yes, so thank you. My question is to ask whether the Rabbanim who belong to the Rabbinical Assembly that are from all over the world are part of the discussion in reaching the tshuvot of the RA.
Answer is yes. In the earlier years, it was.
Phil, we can't hear you. Make sure you're on the English channel.
Oh, okay. It was, yeah, the answer is yes. Early years, not as much, but even when I was on, we had representatives of South America and Israel. And there are representatives of different Europe. There are representatives on the CJLS now, because especially since a lot of the meetings are virtual, it's really easy to do so. In early years, there was an issue of expense of flight tickets from across the world to come to New York, but now it is less New York centric. And yes, there are people, the voice of rabbis from different parts of the world is heard. Israel has its own Vad Halacha, so Israel's a bit different. I mean, not every, but we still have Israeli representation on the global Vad Halacha, and it does apply. You know, what is determined is meant for Masorti rabbis worldwide. It's not exclusive to North America. Maybe once was. It's certainly not the case now.
I don't want to entirely disagree, but I think that the European rabbis have a bit of a gripe in that we don't feel represented on the Vad Halacha. I'm not aware of there ever being a European on the Vad Halacha, and there certainly isn't one today, or in the 20 years that I've been involved in the movement here in Europe. And I think that I think that that's one of the issues. And
well,
one of the issues for us,
yeah. I'm happy to, I'm not happy to hear that, but I would encourage you, I'm out of action right now. I'm far removed from both, but I think that's an important issue, and I would certainly take that up with Jacob Blumenthal and ensure that that is rectified, because there should always be, there should certainly be at least one European representative. We have great halachas in Europe, and you know, in London and in France and other, we have really people who would deservedly be very appropriate for the CJLS. And if that's not happening, because I've been a bit removed from it, it totally should be happening. So I thank you for the correction.
Okay, we'll move on to Ila. Another question?
Yeah, so we had a question in French. I apologize, I'm going to completely butcher the name. Berengier, are you still with us?
Oui, oui, je suis là. Oui.
Okay. Okay. Bérangère is going to speak in French. Does everybody hear? Okay. In terms of the place of homosexuals, 13 positive vote to integrate homosexuals or recognize homosexuals. As opposed, 13 out of how many voted for it, and is it only the rabbis who voted? Thank you.
13 out of 25. So it was it was almost a split vote, and only rabbis voted. And I would posit, by the way, that were that vote to be taken today, it would be overwhelmingly different. I mean, really, attitudes have really shifted over the last 15 years. And I think that I would posit that that vote today would be 20-5, not 13-12. And I've discussed it with some of my other members of that body of the CJLS back in those years. And, you know, we've agreed on that. I think, but it was 13 out of 25. That was the position paper that was authored by Rabbis Nevins, Dorff, and Reisner.
Merci.
Okay, we had a question from Margot Gold. If you're still there.
Hi, I am, and I think Phil really addressed it. I was asking about the CJLS conversation about enabling congregations to Zoom religious services, and what's ahead for the holidays.
Maybe I'll respond to that. Phil can respond too. That is, of course, a very recent response, and the reason that I jumped in is that just today I spent 2 hours on Zoom conversations relating to that, but probably in the last week I've probably been on 5 different meetings relating to that. And if anything, I think that it represents for us the fact that a tshuva always has a cultural context, and the cultural context in Europe is not the same as the cultural context in America. And I think that that tshuva symbolizes for us the fact that there are no Europeans on the Bad Halacha. So if that vote was taken in Europe, there wouldn't have been a majority supporting that decision. And when I speak to my American colleagues, everyone is so excited about that decision, and it sounds like such a wonderful thing to have been done. And for me, it represents the distance we feel from a committee which is supposed to be representing us and supposed to be instructing us, and on which we don't really have a say. So that's my note.
And I will apologize for my question. And see, I did not realize that, because I am interloper today since I am here in Atlanta, Georgia. I'm not in Europe. And I did not realize that there was two such opposed approaches here, because it has had a huge impact here. And I thought it was an interesting collaboration between various portions of the movements as we are trying to come to some thoughts about the high holidays as well and how to handle that.
Yeah, no, it certainly is a very monumental decision, and it's a moment which is challenging all communities everywhere. And you know, we're all facing the same challenges, and we're all trying to find solutions to them. But there's also a cultural context. But Rabbi Phil, you wanted to come in.
Well, I would just add, I think, to Rabbi Chaim, I would say that I would be prepared after Yom Tov to orchestrate a conversation with you, with myself, with Rabbi Jacob Blumenthal and Rabbi Elliot Dorff, the chair of the, to find a way of integrating Europe, because if that clearly has not been happening, and it's essential. So I think we need to have that voice at the table, It doesn't mean we often felt as Canadians that we were not really represented, because there were less so today perhaps, but there have been cultural differences between Canada and the U.S. on a lot of these issues. So I think, but as we do have South America there, I'm not sure if there's a present member from South America. And I know Reuven Hammer, Oliver Sholem, was on the CJLS, so I appointed him. But I'm not sure who the Israeli is right now. But I think there is a serious issue, a need for a conversation to better integrate Europe into the process. So I'd like to pursue that with you, after we get through Yom Tov and see how we can take that further.
Okay, Tila, are there more questions? Are we starting to wrap up?
Just one short last question, which I'm going to ask on behalf of Joanna Kubar. Could the Eitz Chaim be translated into French? It would be a big step forward.
I'm winning all the questions today. Absolutely yes, the issue is money. And we've talked, I know this discussion when I was RA president about a Spanish version. There is one issue that we have to deal with, that the Eitz Chaim, and I'll say this as a Canadian, a lot of the commentary reflects an American vantage point. So it's not simply translation, but there might need to be some commentary shifting to make it more relevant to the European scene, or in a Spanish version to the South American scene. So it's a more complex project, but it really should be. If we are, we have to stop being an Anglo-Saxon movement in terms of, and getting, our work out in other languages, including, by the way, Hebrew. So I think there'd be willingness. The question will be funding, because obviously this is an extraordinarily expensive undertaking.
I would just add to that, the Masorti France, more than any of the other parts of the European Masorti movement, has been very, very good at its publication. I think that the French Masorti Siddur is a huge achievement, and many people are part of that, particularly our colleague Rion Christian from Adat Shalom, who did the bulk of the work on that. Now 3 volumes. There's the Siddur for Shabbat, and there's the Machzor for the Yamim Noraim, and then there's a weekday Siddur, and that's a huge achievement. I would just point out that the movement in the UK hasn't published its own Siddur, and maybe because things are available in the English language, but as Rabbi Phil pointed out, that not everything that's published for an American audience is actually suitable for a British audience, and is necessarily suitable for audiences in different parts of the world. So I think publications is a very big challenge, and I don't know, from my vantage point as the director of Masorti Europe, I think that for the most part the solution lies in Europe and not necessarily in other places. In any case, we're coming to the end of our time. We've run over our time. I want to say thank you to everyone who's taken the time this evening to be with us, and it's really wonderful to see so many people, and it's wonderful that we can come together and share vantage points between us. And the third lecture in the series is going to be on the 9th of June, and the other subject is going to be about our communities around the world, not the institutions around the world, but what does a Masorti community look like in Uganda, and how are the communities in South America different than the communities in Australia? And everyone thinks the Masorti movement looks like their community, and I can tell you that it doesn't look like your community. There's a huge range of different communities, and that's a subject on the 9th of June. I also want to flag that on the 21st of June, not part of this series, we're planning a longer seminar. It's a Sunday afternoon, and the subject is really going to be meeting the challenges of the high holidays there the subject of Zooming or not Zooming on the high holidays is going to come in. There's going to be questions about what kind of programming we can do and giving ideas and inspiration for communities of what to do with the high holidays. We're going to learn how to do shared online choirs. There's a whole specialization for how to do that, and I think Masorti France again has been leading the rest of the European movement in putting together choirs together with Adat Shalom and together with the community in Nice, and we're going to learn how to do that technology. We're going to hear best practice for if you're doing an online service, how do you do it well? Not every online service is good. So there'll be lessons about learning about who is doing it best and what you can copy from other communities. So all kinds of issues around the challenges of this time, and particularly in preparing for the high holidays. And that's going to be on the 21st of June. And we're going to be sending out more information about that as we come closer. So once again, I want to thank everyone for being with us. I want to take the opportunity to wish everyone Chag Sameach as we approach Shavuot, and wonderful to see you all. It's just Kol Yisrael Chaverim. We're all friends and we're all in this together, and it's so wonderful to be sharing the screen together with so many people who are so dear to us. So Chag Sameach. And thank you to everyone. And thank you to all of our speakers who gave us the evening and were here with us. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye, Chag Sameach.